Today is Friday, December the 24th, 2021, and you are live on the Mbongi. And today's topic is ancient Kemet as a Bantu civilization. And I will probably label this part one of a series along this line, subtitled Introducing the Into Universe. And this was the lecture that I did on the 13th of November for brother Mobali Makasi out of France, who's out of the Democratic Republic of Congo, for a French-speaking audience. But I decided to do this presentation today based upon a recent TikTok video that I've seen, I have downloaded, and I will show it to you in just a moment. And we will go from there. So again, this is ancient Kemet as a Bantu civilization, introducing the Into universe. And so before then, trailer to play.
You see, I have a lot of things that's on my mind, and I would like to let them out. Look, I see reality breaking down all my fantasies. It would be nice if I at least had one fantasy. That neutrality about to take a terabyte from the American apple pie, better get a slice. It's kinda scary the way that this life is moving on. Marvin's doing backflips inside his grave, what's going on? We have head-on collisions, not seeing another's vision. Maybe that's the reason why some colors fit the description. A lot of relationships need life rafts, sinking ships. I guess you just can't have only one like potato chips. I would love for you to listen with an open heart, but would you really even hear me if it's torn apart? I don't do the things that I used to. I'll be fine even if I lose you, okay? Okay.
Peace and blessings, family. My name is asarimhotep, and I am with the Martin Delaney Center for Egyptology, as well as the popular YouTube channel Mbongi. I am an Africologist and computer scientist out of Houston, Texas, and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And I have spent the last 20 years researching the connections between ancient Kemet, that is modern Egypt, and modern Bantu-speaking cultures of Central and Southern Africa. Throughout this 20-year journey, I've examined all the relevant literature in numerous languages, collected paleontological as well as archaeological data from across millennia. I have presented hypotheses and abandoned hypotheses, come to conclusions and abandoned conclusions, reviewed arguments for and against known hypotheses, and analyzed frameworks that sought to define and characterize the vast array of African experiences. After over 20 years of asking critical questions of history, of philosophy, religion, and culture, I have finally gotten to the point where I have complete and total faith in the results of our research. I say our research because I am one of among a number of scholars who have either laid the foundations in classical Africology or are continuing to expand and develop more robust research on this connection between ancient Egyptian and Bantu civilizations. After spending so much time behind the computer and in the libraries and in the museums for over 20 years, I believe it is time to go out and to touch the living artifacts and engage with the people involved in the research whose stories we have been telling all this time, which brings us to why we are here today. Although I have written and will continue to write about the results of my research, my goal now is to summarize this data and present it in documentary film form. I have decided to put some of that computer science as well as new media experience together to creatively tell this important aspect of African history that many may not be aware of. The title of the film is Cyena-Ntu, Ancient Kemet and the Into Universe, and we are currently raising funds for the first phase of our journey. In February of 2022, I will be joining the crew of the award-winning documentary film Happy, The Role of Economics on the Development of Civilization, for a very important Returning to the Source tour and conference in Egypt, which we know is in Northeast Africa. And while I am there, I will be shooting parts of our film Cyena-Ntu and gathering footage for a proof of concept trailer, which will be used for greater fundraising efforts in the near future. And this is where you come in. I am currently trying to raise $5,000 to help with location expenses, equipment rentals, insurance, and the like, so that we can get some great shots for some primary as well as B-roll footage. When we return from Egypt, some of this footage will be combined with some preliminary interviews to compile a unique trailer to give the audience and potential investors a glimpse of the vision and potential of the film. Our ultimate goal is to travel to places like the Democratic Republic of Congo, Zimbabwe, Uganda, and South Africa for the first film. And did I forget to mention that we intend for this to be a series of documentary films? Therefore, subsequent films will require us to travel to places like Cameroon, Nigeria, Ghana, and Senegal, as well as Ethiopia, Kenya, and Somalia. We have big goals, and with your help, we can make this happen. And if you're interested in donating to this film project, please visit our website at www.Cyena-Ntufilm.com, where you can leave a donation. There are other ways you can donate as well, which includes joining our Patreon page, donating through CashApp, or donating live when we're doing a live show on YouTube. And the YouTube channel has over 6,000 subscribers, and Facebook has over 5,000 subscribers as well. And with a minimum donation of like $5 each, we can quickly reach our goal. You can spread the word of our efforts by sharing this video with friends and colleagues, as well as liking it. We appreciate your help, and all donors will be given credit on the website as well as at the end of the film during the credits. We thank you from the bottom of our heart to those who have given generously already, and we look forward to bringing this important film to the public. Hotep. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It is your brother asarimhotep. Thank you all for joining this live discussion on this Friday. Y'all could be out in these streets trying to get last minute Christmas gifts, but instead you are here with me. And so I do appreciate it greatly. And so, you know, what you just saw was the first of the phase 1 trailers in terms of fundraising, you know, for phase 1 of the film Cyena-Ntu, Ancient Kemet and the Ntu Universe documentary film series that I am developing. And so, as many of you all know, I will be going to Egypt, Kemet, if you want to say, in February as part of the Happy Aket Tours, returning to the Source Conference and Tour. And I believe it is on the 25th and 26th of, let me just make sure before I give y'all the wrong dates. And so, yeah, I think it's like the 26th and 27th of February, in which there's going to be this 2-day conference. And speaking at the conference is going to be Professor Small, Dr. Leonard Jeffries, Brother Anthony Browder, Dr. Solange Ashby, Dr. Rosalind Jeffries, the wife of Dr. Leonard Jeffries, Dr. Wade Nobles, and his wife, Dr. Vera Nobles, Brother Mfadishi Jehuti Mess, and of course, your brother asarimhotep. And Dr. Teofalo Binga is going to be at the conference and presenting. And so while I am there at the conference, well, not just the conference, while I'm there at the tour, I will be filming some parts of the documentary and taking some of that footage and to create a full uh kind of teaser trailer to be used as a greater fundraiser. So, we're looking at trying to raise just a little over $100,000 to do this film series. And so, um, but right now, I'm just trying to raise $5,000. And so, if you want to contribute to the film, you can go to Chiena-Ntu uh, film.com. Matter of fact, let me just type that in and create a banner for it real quick. Chiena-Ntu film.com. And we can add that banner and boom. So this is the link to the film, and it's also in the description. So you'll see the link in the description if you can't type it at the moment. It's right there in the description. And so there you'll get a little bit more details of exactly what's going on. You'll see that trailer there, the previous discussion that we had on it. And so when I add trailers and stuff, this will be the hub. So this is just kind of a temporary site that you see right now, but this is going to be the main place where you're going to see all the great details. So this will be the central place in which we are doing the fundraising, or you can also do Cash App as well at $asarimhotep. So, but this is the main site here. So before I continue, I want to shout out everyone who was listening live. Mr. Trey Day, thank you for joining us. Sister Jolanda is in the building. Brother Chavez, and we'll be going to Brother Chavez out of H-Town, and the Hoppy movement will be going to Houston on January 8th and January 9th. And so Professor Smalls and Dr. Wade Nobles will be doing a lecture at the Shrine of the Black Madonna off of MLK Street on January 8th, Saturday, January 8th. January 9th is going to be the film showing of the Hoppy documentary produced by our good brother Taki and Felicia. And so we'll actually have them on the program, not this coming Sunday, but the following Sunday, which is the 2nd. So Sunday the 2nd, and Professor Smalls, as well as Dr. Wade Nobles will be on the program here live, and we're going to be discussing the Hoppy film. And so there's going to be a panel discussion. Dr. Wade Nobles, Professor Smalls will be there. Dr. Vera Nobles and myself will be speaking on the panel after the film. So for those of you in the Houston and surrounding areas, go to, do I have a link already for that? No, I don't, but I should. I can just add it real quick. Go to hoppyfilm.com and boom. And you can buy your tickets, for the weekend. And it's going to be a powerful, powerful weekend. And so we, these are pioneering, and they're going to be, of course, in the tour in Egypt in February. So it's about to go down. So shout out to Brother Chavez, who already purchased his ticket. He'll be there. And so I don't know how to pronounce this correctly, so please forgive me for if I mispronounce it, but Assurant, thank you for joining us. And Althea Cross Lasha, greetings and peace to you as well. Peace and blessings, Brother Taye Uhuru. And we have an interview with this brother on this channel. And he does tours to Africa, not necessarily in Kemet. I don't think he does Kemet, but a lot of West and Central Africa, he does tours. So check out Brother Taye Uhuru and just look him up. You can see him up, and he's a musical artist, dope musical artist, a brother that y'all need to keep an eye out for. Your ears to the street. Peace and blessings. Thank you, Sylvia Stewart, for joining the program. And just to let you know, I did receive your purchase, and your book was mailed off today. And so be on the lookout for that. Boom is in the building, and he comes with the icons of the boom. And then we got I am not Pablo, who says, but Bantu post dates Pharaonic Egypt. Ah, my friend. We will get into that. And Conan Lee joining us all the way from the UK, across the waters. Peace and blessings to you. Kimoyo, West Africa, is in the building. Brother the Jed Ankh Hekara, peace and blessings to you, good brother. Always nice to see you. Sister Tamika is in the building. And thank you for the reminding people to support the channel and subscribe. And always a pleasure to have you around. And who else I have here? I have M. Jewel in the building. Peace and blessings. Octo Thorpe has joined us. Thank you, thank you, thank you. MIT S or MITS, I don't know how you say it, but he says, this is anti-African. Nubians are not allowed to not Bantu. We'll get into that. Oh, did Conan Lee already? Let me see who else is here. Kim Sarah Nefra peace and blessings to you. And here we go. Vasa Nicola Gula. Mispronouncing all that and just messing it up. Please forgive me, but it's Friday, and I mispronounce everybody's name on Fridays. Sunjata Atakaka and Zombie is in the building. Moyo, peace and blessings to you. That one guy has made it in the building. And who is this? I am not Pablo. I'm trying to, there we go. That's what I was trying to get. JC Hughes, Mosi Warrior Clan is in the building. And if I forgot anyone, those of you who are joining via the Facebook page, peace and blessings, Emmanuel Adama, and others. That's Sunrise Mitch and others. Thank you for joining. And so now we can get into our program for today. And so again, the title of the discussion is, let me get it here, Ancient Kemet as a Bantu Civilization, Introducing the Ntu Universe. Now, what I'm essentially arguing here is that the ancient Egyptian language and culture and civilization belongs to what I call the Ntu universe or the Ntu family. Now, the minutest of details needed to make this argument is very detailed. And, those of you who have been following this channel for a number of either months or years know that, there's different layers to this discourse. And so we're not going to get all into the details. That's why I've written books upon books and articles, and we have scholars who have already laid this out. But what I want to do is start off this conversation with the TikTok video that I mentioned earlier. And after watching the TikTok video, I'll give my general response to it, and then go into why the film Cyena-Ntu, Ancient Kemet and the Ntu Universe is an important film, and why we have to take over the media. and to tell our own stories based upon our own scholarship, and challenge in every domain, whether it's in academia via journal articles, whether it be at conferences, and then, of course, in the media space. Because unchecked, they will make claims but cannot back up the claims. And then what happens is that you have a lot of individuals who are not that well versed in the academic study of Africa, who will either side with a particular position, or or they don't have the background necessary to challenge the presentations provided by others when they make certain claims. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to blacken the screen like this, and then I am going to go to the video. So hopefully y'all will hear it and can see it well. And because it's a TikTok video, it's not going to show up on the full screen. It's just going to be kind of be vertical in the center. So, depending upon how, wide your screen is or whatnot, hopefully you'll be able to see everything. But even if you can't see everything, hopefully you'll be able to hear exactly what the presenter is trying to argue. So with that said, here is the TikTok video.
The Egyptian race. The Egyptians are not black, they are not white, they are not aliens, they are indigenous to their homelands and come in all shades and colors. A recent paper published in 2021 gives us the clearest insight into the genetic history of the Egyptians, which I have modeled here for you visually to view. At its roots, the Egyptian genome is comprised of an indigenous North African core dating back more than 30,000 years. Around 10,000 years ago, we see the input of Natufian-related ancestry, which came from the first people who discovered farming in the Levant. Around 5,000 years ago, there was additional admixture from the Middle East, except this time characterized by the introduction of Mesopotamian groups who brought a component of their DNA into the region. Upon the unification of both Upper and Lower Egypt, a component known as Mota was introduced, today found high within Cushitic and Omotic groups of Africa. And finally, during the late Bronze Age to late Antiquity, various small influxes of people from the Mediterranean, Maghreb, and West Asia settled in the Nile Delta. The Egyptians, including both Christian Copts and Arabic-speaking Muslims, are the true descendants of the ancient Egyptians who once ruled the fertile plains of the Nile River Valley. The appropriation of Egyptian culture by both political, cultural, and ideological movements atrophies the identity of 104 million people who have ties to the greatest civilization to have ever sprung up in the history of man. Rather than fetishizing Egyptian culture as being alien and mysterious, let us be thankful and acknowledge the modern people of Mesr, whose history and cultural contributions live on through their people with each and every breath.
So I hope y'all were able to listen to that video and to see the arguments. And even though it was a short video, I'm not sure how many minutes it was. I don't know if it was a minute or 2 minutes, but a lot was said. And to be able to attack everything in the video, would take a series unto itself. And so that's not going to happen here today. But I just want to highlight some of the things in which it tried to argue. So you see, first of all, it starts off by saying that the Egyptians were not black. The ancient Egyptians were not black, they were not white, and they were not aliens. They were indigenous to the area. And so what he's trying to paint the picture here, this is something that Zahi Hawass has made arguments for in the past. and still makes to this date. He still makes his argument that they're not black, they're not white, they're Egyptians, as if Egyptians is a race unto itself and is not related to any of the other Africans below the Egyptian borders or anybody else around the world. So they try to make it seem as they are autochthonous. And history shows that this is not the case. First and foremost, when the ancients, for example, the Greeks and things, described the ancient Egyptians, they used the words in their language for black, like melanas, mehas, things of this nature. And um and this is something that we've cited before and gone actually into the Greek language. I've had a scholar here, Dr. Rebecca, I forgot her last name, is just slipping in the head. She's a classicist, PhD level, who studies the Greek language, writes about ancient history and identity, and she reaffirmed what everyone knows, and she's a European lady, that when the Greeks described the Africans, they used the word in their language for black. And so this flies in the face of what the historical records and how everyone described these particular ancient Egyptians. So that's neither here nor there. That's a conversation that has to be constructed well. But then you notice in the video that when he's trying to make these genetic arguments about who the ancient Egyptians are, it's a bunch of BS. Anybody who studies this stuff for real knows that when it comes to ancient human DNA, there's only maybe just a little bit over 30 studies done on ancient DNA in which the stuff has been mapped. And this is around the world. 10 of them are from Egypt. So keep this in mind. When we're talking about extracting ancient DNA from human remains, there is a little bit over 30 that has been done. Around 10 are ancient Egyptians. Some are Moroccan, some that you find in Europe and some other places. And so when they're talking about these DNA studies, they're talking, these are DNA studies from modern groups who currently live in Egypt. And you notice that when the pictures that he was using and trying to say, so what he tried to give the illusion of is that the origins of the ancient Egyptian civilization starts in the Delta. And so all of these groups that he talks about is landing in the Delta, and he's trying to start it there. When anybody who studies archaeology, who studies the actual ancient Egyptian text itself, knows that the civilization came out of the South. And so what they tried to make it seem is that this one, that they share some DNA, with this one African Cushitic group. And then it's a whole bunch of other people who came from further north from Europe into the Delta area, and these makes all the Egyptians. And then he shows a bunch of ancient Egyptian pictures, but they're from the Greek and Roman periods. He showed one photo, it was a New Kingdom photo of the darker ancient Egyptians. And this is a tactic that they use to try to make it seem as if the ancient Egyptians are this light-skinned people who are, closer in genome to people in the Delta. Anybody who knows anything about Egyptian history knows that people from the Levant have been settling in the Delta since the 4th millennium BC. But the culture of what becomes ancient Egypt and everything comes from the South, with other waves of these Nilotic speakers coming in from the Sahara. And so it's very disingenuous. And so when you have videos like a TikTok video that can easily be shared on social media, you can say anything. And for the layperson, and you can see in the responses in the original video, people from Egypt, we're tired of African Americans trying to take our history, yada 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 yada. And this is exactly why I am doing the film, because we already have the scholarship. They're not going to successfully win in an argument about ancient Egyptian history, ancient Egyptian language, and all of this. The problem is the layperson doesn't read. They're not going to read through all the scientific data like I would. They're not going to understand and read the genomes. They're not going to understand statistics and how 10 mummies does not tell you what a population over 3,000 years, 4,000 years of history. You get 10 mummies, and then you're making these sweeping claims in terms of population history. And so this is why on this channel, we stress methodology, understanding these details and what certain tools of analysis can tell you and what are their limitations. And so, excuse me, this is why, for example, and y'all know, like, one of the major tools that I use in my analysis in terms of ancient Egyptian history is linguistics. And so linguistics tells you a different, it tells you a more realistic story of history. You can have all the archaeology you want, but archaeology doesn't tell you who a people are and what their thoughts are unless there's writing on the archaeology, which can tell you exactly who the people are. But understand this: languages can be adopted by people that do not have the same, that do not originate with the original speakers of that language. So being an African American speaking English, we're a living example of that. My genetics says West in Southeastern Africa, but my language says Indo-European. And so when you're doing history like this, you have to be cognizant of that. So you got to know what the tool can tell you, and then what are the limitations of the tool. Just like with genetics. Genetics is a tool that can tell you certain things, but it has its limitations. And what people try to do is use tools in areas for which those tools are not useful. And so, for example, you can't use DNA data to make linguistic arguments. And I've had this, I've had geneticists on the show who have discussed this. I've discussed this ad infinitum, but you'll still find folks all on the internet trying to blend the two, and you even have some professionals that try to blend the two, not understanding the limits, because there's no DNA. There's never going to be a DNA sequence that tells you what language a group of people or that particular mummy or whatnot spoke. It doesn't exist. It's impossible. And so anyone trying to make a genetic and linguistic argument is just ignorant of how science works. But as I mentioned previously, I did a lecture for the French speaking audience. My lecture was being interpreted as we were having the conversation on Brother Mubali Mukasi's channel. And so I encourage y'all to look up his name, Mobali Makasi. And so it's titled the same thing as this discussion. So, well, actually, it's in the French. It's translated into French, so you can't just type, but just type in the asarimhotep, Mobali, and I should come up and on his channel if you're not familiar with that brother's channel. And so the title of the program, of course, was Ancient Egypt as a Bantu Civilization. And so what I'm going to do is share my screen, and then we're going to have that conversation. And then we'll get into, why I named it the way that I named it. So we'll go here. And so, and again, I'd like to thank all of you who are just joining us live. And if you have not subscribed, please make sure that you subscribe to the channel so that, you can get all the latest of when, we have such discussions or interviews and the like. And make sure that y'all like the video. So we can, interrupt and be very disrespectful to the YouTube algorithm that tries to keep African scholarship, at bay. We're going to force them that they have to deal with us in this digital space. So thank you all for joining us today. And so I haven't made any changes to this, so there's some stuff I should probably have added or updated, but I didn't want to make it, too long, the conversation. So we'll keep it as is. So, part of the discussion was on, African spiritual concepts that, within a tradition that we now call Kimoyo. I have a series on Kimoyo that y'all can see on this channel, so I won't go into that now. And y'all know I renamed Africa Bukanda for reasons we won't get into at this moment. But when I say the Ntu universe, I'm specifically talking about a concept which we call Cyena-Ntu. And Cyena-Ntu is a Chiluba Bantu. Chiluba Bantu phrase, and the Chiluba or the Baluba people who exist in the Democratic Republic of Congo in Central Africa. And so there is a particle ina, which means is of the family of, a member of, a part of, to also to like to possess something and to occupy what is the fabric of. But we'll deal with primarily the definitions in A, D, and E in terms of being a member of, or the originator of, or characteristic of, or dealing with the particular quality of. And so it's the quality or the family, the Ntu family. And there are a number of reasons why the ancient Egyptian society belongs to the greater Ntu universe. And that includes language, that includes philosophy, that includes culture and ritual, and even to the degree of numbers and the like. And so when you've critically examined everything that is unique about ancient Kemet, you find its mirror among Bantu speaking people in Central and Southern Africa. But Ntu is beyond simply the modern label of Bantu speakers. And so in the same way that when you think about the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you see all of these particular types of superheroes that exist. They have stories that are unique to them, but they're integrated in a way that it creates an interweb of larger stories in which all of the superheroes and villains of the Marvel comics are connected in what we call the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And so this is just to give you a kind of an understanding of what I mean in terms of the Ntu universe. So there are language groups, there are cultures that exist in their own pocket, but are related and whose history is interwoven by a series of events that have shaped the modern time in the same way that you can think of, what was going on in the MCU. And so, you know, when we talk about certain cultural ideas, like what you see in the this ancient Egyptian relief here, and these rituals of these cones on the head, and sometimes they're made of butter, sometimes they're made of like these other oils and fats. You see this in Ethiopia, you see this in Kenya, you see this in Uganda. This is primarily like an East Africa, Northeast Africa thing. And you gotta imagine, for example, if you have people like, so-called Jewish people or Europeans trying to put a lump of butter on their head, and what that effect would be on their hair type. Whereas in Africa, when they put these oils and fats on their hair, this is what allows them to get those unique type of hairstyles that you see. And so here's an example of a young Afar boy who has this characteristic white fats in the hair, which turns it all kind of like a grayish or whitish color, which you can see here on the left-hand side. These folks were recorded in ancient Egypt with the same type of hairstyle. And just like the modern Afar, these ancient Afar folks who lived in Kemet were cattle herders, nomadic pastoralists. And so when you talk about, an Egyptian, these are Egyptians. And so when you talk about the like the regalia, for example, you see on the left-hand side a sim priest. It's called a sim priest in ancient Egypt. In among the Bantu speaking people, the word is sangoma. And I demonstrate in the Luja Volume 2 how sim and sango, the word for priest, are the exact same word based on regular sound correspondences. But you see this, this is not what you would call a Bantu speaking person in the center here. He's from southern Ethiopia, Sidama. That's a different language group. But you see the tradition. You don't find this in the Middle East amongst native folks, all these so-called folks who came and created an Egyptian civilization. everything that identifies ancient Kemet as Kemet is still practiced to this date in Africa, in so-called sub-Saharan Africa. All these folks who are claiming the heritage of ancient Kemet, you don't find these traditions. And so you see on the top right here a Zulu brother, and then on the bottom right here you see the Dinka. So you also see them recorded in ancient Egyptian history, along with the leopard skin. You find this in Nigeria. You find this in Cameroon. And matter of fact, the same word for the leopard skin and the priest, you find still amongst, like, for example, the Ewe speakers in Benin. There's a whole priest of the Ekpe. And, you know, I'll get into that at another time. But this is the kind of stuff we'll be covering in the film. And so when you talk about the kinds of instruments that are used, the same instruments, you know, you see these sisters here. These are not Middle Eastern sisters. These look just like regular sisters that you find in the southern part in Aswan today, and that you find along the coast, going into, you know, Eritrea, in Somalia, in Kenya. All these sisters that look just like this, same hairstyles and the like. And so you see the same shape, the same style of harp in Gabon, in Central Africa. And so even the words become very important here, because if the ancient Egyptians, who were allegedly native there, but came from the Middle East, if that was the case, then the very fundamental basic words would be the same. And so, for example, you have here the word, we say ma'at, but that's just our modern Egyptology speak convention. It is closer to this word here that you find among the Kimbundu, Malungu, great canoe watercraft. And of course, in the text, we show the regular sound meaning correspondences, which tells us how to properly pronounce this word for a ship or a boat that you find in Central Africa and that you find in ancient Kemet. And so when the more remote ancestors went up the Nile, they brought shipbuilding with them, and the same shape ships that you find in Kemet, you find in Central Africa as well, and they go by the same term. Even the word for bank is mulungu. And so the jewelry style, you don't find people in the Middle East who wear this stuff, but this is common all throughout Central and Southern Africa. This is everyday regalia. And they're called by the same thing. And so I'll get into at a later presentation that these Bantu folks are still carrying the same names as certain ancient Egyptian pharaohs and the like. And so, you know, I've done plenty of videos doing these types of connections, and so again, I won't get too deep today, but when we have individuals like Dr. Teofilo Benga here, who is a linguist and Egyptologist, and as I mentioned before, he will be at the conference in Egypt on February the 22nd. Excuse me, the 22nd, February of 2022. The tour is the 18th through the 28th of 2022. And so, you know, in this book here, The Common Origin of Ancient Egyptian, Coptic, and Modern Black African Languages, an Introduction to African Historical Linguistics, written in French, He looks at and examines the current labels of the phyla of Africa given by the Greenberg School. And the Greenberg School, after Joseph Greenberg, divides the continent into 4 of these major phyla. And that is Niger Congo, Nilo-Saharan, Afroasiatic, and Khoisan. And so this has been a controversial grouping even to this date. Most linguists do not consider these valid constructs because it is created by a method that does not eliminate chance from its inventory or from its analysis. And so Theophilo Benga is not the only one who has challenged these groupings. And there have been European scholars, Asian scholars, and I've cited a lot of them in Alluja Volume 2, challenging these notions of these phyla and how unscientific they are. There's one citation I have. They compared Greenberg's work as comparable to astrology, essentially saying that it's pseudoscience, which it is. And so trying to correct the mistakes of Joseph Greenberg and his school, Dr. Theophilo Benga, doing a systematic analysis between his own language in Bochi and ancient Egyptian and Coptic, with supportive languages of other African groups, has showed that there's an undeniable relationship between these modern African languages that are lumped unscientifically into these other categories of Nilo-Saharan, Afroasiatic, and in Niger Congo. And so what he does is reanalyzes everything, and he decides that there's essentially 3 families on the continent of Africa. There's Berber, that originates in Africa, I should say. There's Berber, there is what he calls Negro Egyptian, and Khoisan. And so in his Negro Egyptian is basically all the other African languages, excluding Semitic. And so years later, some other linguists have come to the same conclusion as Dr. Theophilo Benga, in that Semitic languages do not originate on the continent of Africa proper, and that they originate in the Levant. And so Theophilo Benga excludes the Semitic languages from his Negro Egyptian or any other category. In terms of, excuse me, just took a sip here. In terms of native African languages. And so some years later, brothers Jean-Claude Mboli, a linguist and an electrical engineer out of the Republic Democratic of Congo, of Azande and Songo background, and who currently resides in Toulouse, France, but he also teaches in Africa at a university there as well. So he kind of goes back and forth doing what he does. So he wrote a book, The Origin of African Languages, in French as well, building off of the template that Theophilo Benga created in 1993 with the work that we just saw in the previous slide. And so there were a number of mistakes that Theophilo Benga made. And so Jean-Claude Mboli, starting from scratch, ultimately reaffirmed Dr. Theophilo Benga, but with some major changes to his Negro Egyptian. And so, the Negro Egyptian that Mboli has concluded is broken up into two major branches, which he calls Bere and Beher. And so on the left-hand side, you see the branches of Bere, and then you see on the right-hand side the movement in the branches of Beher. And so what he argues is that, you know, what we're calling Negro Egyptian originates in the Great Lakes area, and that the pre-Proto-Bantu split up into two. And so pre-Proto-Bantu split up into Bantu proper that we know of today, and then what he calls Para-Bantu, which split up into Middle Zande, the Hausa language, and Bambara. And so this is based on linguistic analysis. And again, I said earlier, it's very nuanced, it's very detailed, it's very scientific, and you can't really do it justice in a single video conversation. But then, of course, on the other branch here is the Beher, which and these are the languages that he analyzed in his text, so the first six major. And so there's Coptic, Somali, Sango, Zerma, Wolof, and Luo, for example. And so, just to give you an idea of the breakage of the languages according to the Mboli model. And so notice that Middle Egyptian and Coptic are two separate languages. And so what he argues is that the linguistic analysis demonstrates that Coptic was a different language altogether than Middle Egyptian, and that they both coexisted along the Nile. And more than likely, what we're calling Coptic was the everyday language of the people, while the Bere Middle Egyptian was the language of the elites who took over, who came from the south and conquered and united Upper and Lower Egypt. Excuse me. And so, but that's a discussion for another time. And so, some of y'all who, of course, know me should be familiar with Dr. Teofilo Benga. Excuse me, not Teofilo Benga, but Dr. Mubabinge Bilolo. And so Dr. Mubabinge Bilolo is an Egyptologist, also a linguist and philosopher out of the Democratic Republic of Congo. And he is a native of the Baluba people who I spoke of earlier. And, he's written a number of books, one that you see here that says Towards a Egyptian, Coptic, and Luba Dictionary. The Bantuity of the vocabulary of Egyptian, Coptic, and the essays of Lilius Homberger, if y'all don't know who Homberger is, and of course, Dr. Teofilo Benga. And so he comes up with this label, Cyena-Ntu, for essentially all of the African languages that share affinities with Bantu. And I took that label because I think it is a very good label based on linguistic grounds. And this is the design or the breakdown of the language family as articulated by Mboli. And so without getting into the details of what this all means here, it was confusing because Mboli would call all of these different stages, these are stages here, as Negro Egyptian. And for clarity, I renamed the stages of his Negro Egyptian. So the greater language family I call Chiankonda. So remember that that word that I introduced earlier, Bukanda, for the label of Africa. So this is archaic Chiankonda, the archaic African language that gave birth to Chiankonda Chikulu. This is the most archaic stage. And then you have classic Chiankonda, and that's these stages right here. Then you have Cyena-Ntu. And then you have another split called Kemet. And the interaction of the Kemet branch and the Cyena-Ntu is what gives us Proto-Semitic in the Levant. We don't have time to go into the details of that, but I just want to give you some insight on what I mean by Cyena-Ntu. So Cyena-Ntu is the stage here. And based upon the linguistic analysis, the ancestor of modern Hausa, of Zande, of Middle Egyptian, of Coptic, of Sango, Somali, and even Proto-Bantu is what I'm calling Cyena-Ntu. And what we discover is that when we reconstruct the parent language, the Proto-Bantu is closest and actually mirrors the reconstruction. So this is how we know that Proto-Bantu is older than these languages here. And we'll give an example of that a little later. And so just to reiterate, Cyena-Ntu is the parent language, the parent group, the Ntu group that gives birth to the two branches that we talked about earlier, Bere and Beher. And so the Bere branch, Hausa, Zande, Middle Egyptian, and also Bantu, the modern Bantu. They're all Bantu languages. It's just that Proto-Bantu and the Bantu that you find in the Central Africa keeps more of and builds on the ancestral into Cyena-Ntu language group that gave birth. The other languages go through a number of changes where they lost a lot of the features that the modern Bantus kept. So modern Bantu is more resemblance of the ancestral Cyena-Ntu than all of the other languages and branches that we mentioned here. And so understand that when we're talking about Cyena-Ntu. And so now we get into the meat of our discussion. So that's just the preliminary. So now, when there's a famous Egyptologist out of Europe, Serge Cyena, and somebody who speaks French can help me pronounce that a lot better. And he wrote a text called The Priest of Ancient Egypt, which you see here on the left. And in the Priest of Ancient Egypt text, he states the following: but for Egypt, the sea marks the limit of a world, of an African world. Thus, the dreams of Ogotomeli. Let me stop here. He says, thus the dreams of Ogotomeli. Ogotomeli was a Dogon priest. There's a book in English on Ogotomeli, written by Marcel Griol. And in this, Griol interviews this elder blind Dogon elder by the name of Ogotomeli, and he breaks down Dogon religion and philosophy for him over, I think, a number of like 30 days or something like that. And so what he's saying here is that, but for Egypt, because beforehand he's talking about, European philosophy and what you find in the Middle East. And then he says, when it comes to Egypt, however, Egypt's different. But for Egypt, the sea marks the limit of a world. So that Mediterranean Sea, that Red Sea, that's the border. That's where the commonality stops in terms of these groups in the Middle East and in the Eurasian corridor, as he's trying to argue here. And so he says the sea marks the limit of a world, of an African world. Thus, the dreams of Ogotameli or the Bantu philosophy carry precious elements which help us to understand better certain aspects of Egyptian religious thought. But we must expect to find little of Platonic thought, that means Greek thought, in this world. And so above is page 4 in the French version. In the English version is page 7 that you see this here. And so this is essential to understand here. And so what he's saying is that when we study Bantu philosophy, you can read a book by the same title by a priest by the name of Temples. Temples wrote a book on titled Bantu philosophy, and it's primarily centered on the Baluba people in the Democratic Republic as kind of an essential, group for understanding Bantu philosophy in general. And so when he's saying that Bantu philosophy carries the precious elements, why? Why would this Egyptologist, this European white Egyptologist, who is one of the top Egyptologists at the time, says when you study Bantu philosophy, it carries precious elements which helps us to understand better certain aspects of Egyptian religious thought. The reason why is because Bantu philosophy and ancient Egyptian philosophy belong to the same Ntu universe. This is brought out by the very linguistic analysis, and there's certain so-called mysteries that you can't even explain in Egyptian society without consulting Bantu languages and cultures. And so this becomes very important. And so when people start talking about why would Bantu with ancient Egyptian, because scholars have already recognized this connection. Matter of fact, how I even got on this path, because I was already studying ancient Egypt, but when I started studying Bantu philosophy, first starting off with Dr. Fukiao's work, I'm like, wait a minute. I see these same things in ancient Egyptian text. And so, it started a 20-year journey in research. And over these 20 years, I've been accumulating this data. And I've gotten to the point now where I can argue with anyone. You bring me your best scholar. Chances are I've already had a conversation with them. You bring me your best scholar, and they will get eaten up with this information. And so I'm just going to leave this here for people who are going to come back and rewind. These are just the sound interchanges in the Egyptian language and some of the source material that discusses these sound alternations. And these become very important when we're doing internal analysis of the ancient Egyptian language. And so also when we're talking about the Sumerian languages, they also have a series of internal dialectical variations of particular sounds. And so I won't go through all these. These are just here for when you review this, you can pause and view for yourself. And of course, I have these in Alluja Volume 2. I have them in the Towards a Chicom dictionary text. All of that is in there. So this is the so-called modern Bantu language zone. And, when you do modern analysis of Bantu languages, they break them up into these zones these zones in many respects are just arbitrary. They're not they're not they're not based on linguistics at all, or any kind of genetics. Is just a kind of a convenient way to kind of group the so-called Bantu languages. And so you can see, you know, some of the groups that are grouped in these particular zones. But note that, okay, so over here on the right-hand side is where you see the Great Lakes. It is the J, D, and F languages that have the oldest archaic Bantu features and vocabulary, with the exception of Kikongo over here. But this is especially Zone J is where you're going to find the oldest forms of the so-called Bantu languages. And this becomes very important, especially for the arguments, the unscientific argument that Bantu started in Cameroon, Nigeria, which they have absolutely no proof of whatsoever. And when you get deep into a lot of linguistic studies, especially when it comes to Africa, you will find that there's a lot of conjecture and no proof. If you ask somebody for a proof of Niger Congo or of Afro-Asiatic, or that Bantu languages originated in southern Cameroon, or in northern Cameroon and Nigeria border, watch the Harlem Shuffle that they're going to give you when you ask for that information. And believe me, I've been searching and asking for years. It's a situation where somebody of prestige presents a hypothesis and people just roll with it as if they have proved the hypothesis. And so, me being a scientist first, coming from a scientific background, a lot of stuff that goes on in a lot of Africanist literature just would not fly in any kind of scientific discourse. And it's just amazing how a lot of this stuff has been passed on as legitimate historical works. But that's a bit too deep for the moment. And again, if anybody has any opposition, bring me your teachers. Let me have the conversation with them live in public, where I can ask them the critical questions. Anyway, so many times y'all have heard me deal with the concept of Ma'at in the ancient Egyptian and other African languages. And so we're going to do this in a very unique way here today. And okay, I just wanted to make sure that that slide was there. So, as we know, that the word Ma'at stands for truth, justice, reciprocity, equality, and order, rectitude as well. And this, again, this word that we're saying as Ma'at is really not Ma'at. That's just, based upon a transliteration system that we use when we are writing ancient Egyptian words for the computer. And so I don't know if y'all can see my mouse, but if you look towards the top here and you see these two graphemes right here, in order to write these two graphemes, because these are not on your computer screen, we use capital A for this grapheme here, and we use lowercase a for this grapheme here. And so what people have done is they've taken that capital A and lowercase a that we use to represent these graphemes that represent sounds that we don't have in English, and they have said Mat, and it's not Mat. That's not how you pronounce it. And so this sound here is actually a nasalized uvular trill, and this actually could be depending upon the vowel that preceded it, either like a dental in terms of like a D sound, or a velar, like how I have here in terms of this voiceless velar here, the K sound. So it's like merakit, merakut, or meradzi, or meradzit, you know. And so how it was exactly pronounced, we'll never know because we don't know the vowels. But understand that these are consonants and not vowels. So it's not mat. So when you understand, this is going to be very important when we're doing a systematic analysis, when we're trying to discover. And keep in mind that you won't find ma'at in Semitic languages. It doesn't exist. And so none of those groups that they allegedly had came over out of the Middle East and brought the culture and started ancient Egyptian, they didn't have no ma'at. But what I'm about to show you is that the ancient inherited this term from their pre-dialectical ancestor that they shared with the Bantu speakers. And they still worship Ma'at to this date. You go to Central Africa right now, and God is referred to as what we're saying is Ma'at. And I'm going to show you. And so in another analysis, I show how Ma'at and Ra are essentially the same deity, just a masculine, feminine version of it. And these are just various different pronunciations that you will find in modern Bantu languages like Kalunga, Karunga, Mulungu, Murungu, Kalanga, Itango, Katanga, Intangu, Ilanga, for son and the word for God in these African languages. And so we know that Ma'at, again, is, order, harmony. A cognate for it in the Bassa language in Cameroon is Ibag, which means structuring, arranging, ordering, grouping together. Together harmoniously, order and structure again. And so we know from the text that Ma'at was thus more than only the principle of universal order. It was an integral part, an inseparable aspect of the cosmos, without which the cosmos would not have even existed. Essentially, what we're talking about here is that Ma'at is the universe itself. It is God. It's just another label. It's just a title for God. God has many names. God has many titles, and there's a way that you have to understand these names. It's just another word, just an aspect of God, but it's essentially the universe itself. And as we know, in the African milieu, existence is God. And so what I want to share here, there's a book by Dr. Lyle Campbell, who's a linguist. There's an article by Dr. Lyle Campbell, who's a linguist, in the book, The Handbook of Historical Linguistics, which is edited by Brian D. Joseph and Richard D. Jonda. And so this is one of the reasons, and I think they talk about this, he's one of the major critics of Greenberg and his mass comparative method and the pseudoscience of Niger-Congo, Nilo-Saharan, Afro-Asiatic, and Khoisan. And it's interesting because there's a book that's coming out by a lot of a number of linguists who had a conference recently talking about that they cannot establish a relationship with ancient Egyptian and Semitic. All European scholars reinforcing exactly what Theophilo Benga said in 1993. Actually, earlier, as early as 1974, and even in the 60s. So, but this, he wrote an article, a chapter in this book here titled "How to Show Languages Are Related: Methods for Distant Genetic Relationship." So, what he says here is very important and critical to understand. So I'm going to go through this slowly. He states, while some sounds may stay relatively unchanged, many undergo changes which leave phonetically non-identical correspondences. Let me pause here. The reason why this line is very important, again, he's challenging those people who are trying to do these super long comparisons, but only looking for words that sound alike in the long distance languages. And so we're talking about people who are doing stuff like Nostratic languages, and this kind of blend with Altaic and all this, and of course the phyla of Nilo-Saharan, Niger Congo, Afroasiatic, and Khoisan. And so by doing the mass comparative method, what they do is they just basically is what we call lookership. Lookership, just looking for words that kind of sound, that look like they look similar to other words and have a similar meaning. And so this is just untenable in historical comparative linguistics. It's unscientific. And any results that come from that method produces unscientific results. And so this is why the whole Greenberg idea is thrown out the window for a lot of African scholars, because it's just unscientific, and it leads to these false results. And so I'll start over. While some sounds may stay relatively unchanged, many undergo changes which leave phonetically non-identical correspondences, meaning that some of the correspondences are not going to look like the words in which you're comparing. But you can only come to this conclusion by doing the comparative method, which is essentially the scientific method for linguistics, historical comparative linguistics, that is. He says, one wonders, this is why I have this in red, one wonders why correspondences that are not so similar are not more common in such proposals. Meaning when they're making these arguments for these long distance, grouping these large phyla that's supposed to go back 20, 30, 40,000, 50,000 years, like with Niger Congo and all this, how come when they're doing the correspondences that there's not more correspondences that don't look alike? All the correspondences in which they show are words that look similar, which means that it's going to be a chance look-alike. That these are pseudo correspondences. And so we continue. The sound changes that lead to such non-identical correspondences often change cognate words so much that their cognacy is not apparent. These true but non-obvious cognates are missed by methods such as multilateral comparison. And I have in the brackets, aka mass comparison, the Greenbergian methodology, which seeks inspectional resemblances. In other words, lookership. And it's lookership without any kind of checks and balances to ensure that they don't have pseudo correspondences. And so I'll just give one example here. He says, for example, in the Hindi, this Saka compares Sanskrit chakra and Singh, Sanskrit Sringa, are true cognates of the English word wheel and horn, respectively. Now, when you look at, I'm going to pause here. When you look at the word Saka and you look at the word Sakra, where you get the word chakra from, for all you yogi and chakra folks who be talking about your third eye and kundalini going up your chakras, you know that the word chakra just means wheel. So how does this Hindu word and this Sanskrit word saka and chakra, how is it cognate with the English word wheel? They don't look alike. They don't sound alike. Anybody who was doing lookership would say these words are not cognates. But through a series of sound meaning correspondences, we know that this is in fact the case. The reconstruction of the word for wheel in Indo-European is quequolo. And so what happened is there was some aspiration. The K in the center of this K here in the center, this rounded K, it became W. Intervocally, and when the this K here, I'll take that back. This K became W, this K became aspirated, and so it became wheel. Whereas the E, this front vowel here, caused palatalization of this first sound here. So that's why it's cha or sa here in the Sanskrit, in the Hindu words, because of a palatalization because of this front vowel. If you don't know these things about, linguistics and sound change and the environments which motivate sound change, you won't know how the Proto-Indo-European word quiquolo becomes saka or chakra. And so he gives some other examples of how even the word five in English comes from Proto-Indo-European pinque. Pinque does not sound like five. However, looks can be deceiving. And this is why common sense, there's no such thing as common sense science. Common sense is antithesis to science, because the universe continually tells us that things are not always as they seem. And so we have to have methods and instruments to be able to see reality for what it is. And that's what the comparative method allows for us to do, so that we're not relying on inspections, or resemblances. So keep this in mind. I hope I explained this as simply enough as I could as possible, and it's going to make more sense in a bit. So now, what I have here is a comparison of three languages. I have the reconstructions of Proto-Bantu, and I have the Egyptian language, and I have the Sumerian language here on the right, and I have the sound correspondences for the consonants on the far corner over here, right? Now, notice the words that I have on the left. They're consonants. The template for which the vowels will change and give different meanings is pang or ping. So the consonant is P, and then a nasalized voice velar G, which gives us the like in the word hunger. But when you look at the words, if you're just doing inspectional correspondences, you're just looking here, this doesn't look like the forms that you see here in Egyptian and Sumerian. So this word panga means country or foreign country. It's a word for land or a place. In Egyptian, it becomes the suffix of the abstracts. So you got to understand that in the Chiena-Ntu languages, the word for ground or place, which becomes a word for country in a lot of languages, becomes grammaticalized as either a prefix or a suffix of the abstract. And you see this in the Egyptian language. For those of you who have studied ancient Egyptian, for example, when you see the leg and foot glyph, the B glyph, that is it's a word for foot, and it's also the word for place. And so you put boo, the W behind it, boo. And it becomes the the word for place. And then it also substitutes as the prefix of abstracts. So Egyptian has a prefix bu of abstracts, and it also has a suffix of abstracts, which we say nawa, niwe, this right here. Some people say nu. They'll pronounce the W as a U sound. And so in Sumerian, it is nam, prefix of the abstract. Now I'm going to go back a number of slides. So just to remind you of something here. So remember, when you're coming back to review this lecture, pay attention to these slides here. Pause them and notice the sound interchanges between the consonants. So know that Egyptian M and B interchange, M and W interchange. So does R and N. And then so does this sound here with yer, and this sound with Z, B and W, B and P. And here are the source materials. So in Sumerian, these sounds interchange with each other. So we have emisal, emigur. Those are the two major branches. So M and N and N, N and N, S and S, sh and sh, S and N, et cetera, et cetera. These are sounds that interchange with each other in the first consonant position and in the second consonant position, right? And so here's some examples of that. So when I'm making the statements that I'll be making in the other slide, you'll understand what is here. So you know that N will interchange with D, and D also interchanges with Z, and N also interchanges with sh in Sumerian, and S. So we can go back here, and you can see that here in these words. So sh in at the bottom, sang. So sh and S, but notice shara and nira in this here. And notice this word here, shin buna, nig buna. The S, the sh, the fricative here, and this in the nasal here, they interchange. They're dialectical. So when you're seeing these correspondences here, understand in the language that B and W interchange, and so does B and M interchange. So we're seeing the correspondences here. This word here, pang, act, make in Bantu, pangi, creator. In Egyptian is neb, creator, builder, nebi, goldsmith, seneb, to build, nibi, to fashion, to model, to gild. Sumerian, dim, to create, make, manufacture, to replace. Also nu, create. It lost the second syllable. And so when you say pang in Proto-Bantu, to plan, to intend. In Sumerian, nam, forethought, planning, understanding, instruction. Panga, God. Pango, big and grand. Chikam, Neb, Lord, Master. Sumerian, Nam, Lord, Master. Ungi, flute, whistle. It's the instrument. But Sheneb, trumpet, tube. Sumerian, Nab, a musician. So you have some semantic slippage here. And then you have Pangan, to agree. Bang, from meaning to plan, the same word here. And so nanam, a partial reduplication here, consent, assent, to consent. And also a dialectical variation of this word, she and sheg, to agree, to be in agreement with, to obey. That's what a consent is. You get an agreement, you get permission, et cetera, et cetera. So we see here these correspondences where this can only happen. These aren't inspectional. You can't say that Pong looks like Neb and that I'm just making up correspondences here. Or that Pong looks like them or Nam. They don't look alike. They don't sound alike. But that's because from the parent language, which we call Cyena-Ntu, there was a number of sound changes in the language. So let's keep this in mind. So we do the same thing here. Pang, shoulder, shoulder blade. In Chikam, irabi, left hand or arm. In Sumerian, zag, arm, shoulder, side. Pongo, oath, blood, pack. Ribit, riba, wishes, vow, oath. And in Sumerian, sangba, sangba'a, oath. Panga, country, foreign country again. Ineb, field, because it's just a word for land. In Sumerian, sug, steep, open country. And we can do this all going down to these bottoms here. That's why I say bring me your teachers, because any linguist who would disagree obviously doesn't know how to do linguistics. And so you can see here that the PNG in Proto-Bantu is cognate with the NB and NW. And remember that when we go back to our comparisons in Egyptian, that this nasalized uvular trill alternates with N and R. So when you see this in one dialect, you'll see RN in another dialect. So let's go back to that second one. So when you see Pangi and how this nasalized uvular trill, in the other ones, it becomes a full nasal. And you see the B that corresponds here, it becomes a nasal in these forms here. And so this is why the internal information is important in terms of the sound changes. But you can see it is consistent through Bantu, through Egyptian, and Sumerian. So when we talk about Panga, cranium in front, Shenebet, front, chest, throat, Sang, head, person, capital. Like all of these. And so this is a family resemblance. This is not chance look-alike. You can't say that we're doing inspectional resemblances. These correspond because they regularly correspond in the same position to the same sounds. This is how historical linguistics is done. And so because linguistics is excuse me, a product of logic and mathematics, it follows certain mathematical axioms. And so this is an axiom called transitivity in logic and mathematics. And so what you're seeing here is that if A implies or equals B, and B implies and equals C, therefore A equals C. I hope y'all get that. If A implies or equals B, and B implies or equals C, A therefore equals C, because they're all equivalent. So when you're going here, this is A equals B in this consonant position. That's what we're showing here in the correspondences on the right. And B equals C, therefore A equals C. This is a mathematical equation built on the principles of logic. And so, understanding, now let's look at Ma'at. So remember, the central from the Egyptian, this column right here, the second to the going to the right, is Neb. So we have Neb and Nu corresponding with Pang over here, right? And you see the same thing and with the various Nab and Nam in Sumerian, right? So with Neb, Neb, Nim, Rem, Reb, same things here, right? So A equals B, and if A equals B and B equals C, therefore A equals C. right? That's the axiom, transitivity. So now, and I don't know why I have this on this row twice here. So now we're looking at the word ma'at, right? Or ma, or medic, because again, these are not two A sounds. These are not two vowels. These are both consonants, right? And so when you see this sound here, this M is a prefix. That's why I have the dot here. And the root is highlighted in red. So you have the nasalized volar trill corresponding to the N sound here in neb. So notice ma, fabric, linen, seneb, woven product to weave, fabric, fabrication, marak, place, location, inebu, a field. And there's other variations of this form here that reinforce this as well. Marak, water of the sky, water, salt water. New, water. Remember, B and W interchange. And so what happens is between two vowels, any of the labels, the plosives, P, B, or even M, becomes W in between those in between two vowels. So that's why you'll see an interchange between B and W sometimes. So marak, rope, seneb, cord, twine, marak, to kill, to slaughter, sacrifice, haneb, slaughter, nebu, sin, damage, barahu, wood, board, plank, nebu, a wooden device, barahuwa, a kind of wood, newut, a kind of wood. So what is this telling you here? Oh, I'm sorry, I got to get that out of the way. What is this telling you here? That if A equals B and B equals C, A therefore equals C. So we showed here that neb equals the root of ma. There's different prefixes and suffixes to these biconsonant roots in ancient Egyptian. So these are both Egyptian dialectical variations. These are two different dialects for the same word here. Now, so what are we saying here based on the principle of transitivity? If Proto-Bantu P or ping equals Egyptian neb, and because I wrote this in French for the French, I should have retranslated it back in English, but if C, Proto-Bantu ping equals Chicam neb, and Chicam neb equals, Chicam neb equals Chicam rak. Therefore, alors, Chicam rak equals Proto-Bantu or Bantu ping. Ping equals at in the word ma'at. So when we see words, for example, like ma'at, put together to tie, ma'at, orderly management, order, harmony. In Chibantu, for example, in Chiluba, we have the word kabezia impungu. That word impungu is a word for God. Impungu comes from punga, meaning complete, perfect, to arrange perfectly, put in perfect order, order perfectly. Punga, to agree with. This is a Chiluba. Punga, to agree with, to be on good terms, to live in harmony, to act in concert. And remember what I said earlier, that ma'at is just another word for God in the ancient Egyptian language. And we see the root of ma'at, panga, God. And we want to make this just a word for God to be impanga or impungu, is what we say here. And then pongo, big and grand. In the Bakongo language, they say in Zambia impungu, which is cognate with amin ma'at. In Zambia impungu tulendo. Impungu is cognate with the word at. So when you find in Bantu the word mpungu for punga, this is mat, that y'all talking about in ancient Egypt. And the only way that this could be is if there was a historical relationship that they inherited from the common ancestor, which we call Chiena-Ntu. So that's what, when we go back to this statement here, while some sounds may stay relatively unchanged, many undergo changes which leave phonetically non-identical correspondences. One wonders why correspondences that are not so similar are not more common in such proposals. The sound changes that lead to such non-identical correspondences often change cognate words so much that their cognancy is not apparent. These true but non-obvious cognates are missed by methods such as Greenberg's multilateral comparison, aka mass comparison, which seeks inspectional resemblances. In other words, when you can show these types of correspondences that I'm showing here makes the argument stronger, because you can't say that they borrowed these terms from the ancient Egyptians, nor did the ancient Egyptians borrow this from the Bantu speakers. You can only explain these correspondences and them not sounding alike as being inherited from the same ancestral language and tradition. In other words, going all the way back, let's go all the way back. But for Egypt, the sea marks the limit of the world, of a world, of an African world. Thus, the dreams of Ogotomeli or the Bantu philosophy carry precious elements which help us to understand better certain aspects of Egyptian religious thought. But we must expect to find little of Platonic thought in this world. In other words, it doesn't correlate, it's not in alignment with European thought. It's not in alignment with Asian thought. If you want to get to the core of the ancient Egyptian ideas and philosophies, which gave birth to the monuments and things that you see in ancient Egypt, you must consult groups like the Dogon and the Bantu people, because they hold the keys to unlocking the insights of ancient Egyptian. Notice that he he didn't name any of the so-called groups that exist in the Middle East. Why can't we go to the Semites? Why can't we go to the Jews? Why can't we go to the Arabs? Why can't we go to the Akkadians or the Caucasians or the Assyrians or the Hittites? Why can't we go to those groups? If that's allegedly where these groups, ancient Egyptians, come from, why can't we go to them to consult and ask critical questions in relation to ancient Egyptian thought and culture? Because they don't belong to the Ntu universe. So this is just some representations, some carvings in Zambia and Pungu out of Congo, and then Kabezia and Pungu. So the equivalent in Egyptian would be Amen Ma'at. This would be the Bantu and the Bakongo of saying Amen Ma'at. We get into another, I get into that in my latest book on Yoruba Orisha. Let me get the title right. Chiluba Maweja, Yoruba Orisha, and Ancient Egyptian Ak, an exploratory etymological study, which I just released a couple months ago. And, so there's an explanation of how in Zambi is cognate with the word Amen, and you can check the work. And so this would be equivalent to Amen Ma'at. And then this would be Kabezia. This is cognate with Ra. And this is another, people pronounce Ra wrong. But Ra is cognate with Orisha. And in one variation, this is Kabezia. Ka being a prefix, Bezia being a root. And in Chiluba, they would say maweja, maweja. And in the other languages, they would say marisha, malisa. In Yoruba, they drop the prefix, so they just simply say orisha. They have their own prefix, o. In Benin, they just simply say leza. As a matter of fact, in Chiluba, they say leza as well. But this is Ra Ma'at. Well, you can say Ma'at Ra. But Ra comes, saying first. In God, in Zombie comes first. So it's in Zambia Mpungu, Kabezya Mpungu. These are actual names for the divine in Congo, in Bantu speaking Congo. So now this is part 2 of our conversation. So when you think about, for example, the phrase nefer, and this is nefer among the Baluba and the Yoruba. So nefer, and so the spirit of good character, right? So this is a Luba priest, a divinatory priest out of the Democratic Republic of Congo that you see on the right here. And I guess some kids in the background just want to get in the camera. So this is nefer in the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. And so for those of you that don't read hieroglyphs, this is the W. This is a biconsonantal sign of WN. Remember that the ancient Egyptians did not write out their vowels. So we have consonantal skeletons. And so this is win or NN, WNN. These are complementary sounds here. And then nefer. This is this glyph right here, the heart and the lungs, the windpipe glyph here. And this is just a classifier or the determinative of a deity, and this deity happens to be holding the Ankh symbol, which is Inkwa in Kikongo. But this phrase together is nefer. This is a title. It's given to a lot of deities, but it's most well known for Osiris, which you see over here, Osir in the Luo language, a Nilotic language in East Africa. So there's still people named Osir in Africa, and especially among the Luo, the folks. But this is how you write the word in hieroglyphs, just a different variation. And this should be neferu, because this is a masculine suffix, because it's a title for Osiris, of course, who's a male. So remember what we've been saying already, that the strongest evidence is going to come when you can show a series of correspondences with words that don't look or sound alike, but whose sounds correspond and show a pattern in the same consonant position and have the same meaning. And so in this is Chikam, my word for Egyptian. It's just a Bantu way of saying the word Kemet. And so Winu, child in the womb. And in Chiluba, we would say Mukuji, fetus, descendant. And so the Z or L can become this sound here in Chiluba when followed by the I sound. So we see the correspondence here. Iwin, pillar, column. Jikunji, column, pile. Desert, hair, wind, wand, however you want to pronounce it. And Chiluba, kalulu, rabbit. Wind, to exist, to become, to essence. Buikadi, and remember what I said, that bu prefix of the abstract, which is a prefix in Egyptian. It is also a prefix in Chiluba and just Bantu in general. And so this is what this prefix here, the U turns into W in front of a vowel. So So we say buikari, essence, to be, from the word ikala, to be. So notice that the L becomes D when L is followed by I. So D. But the D sound in Egyptian, in Chiluba sounds more like G. So it's like buikaji. So that's how in some dialects that G become this G sound here. So, just a little background. So when, to move to and fro. Jikula, remove, move away. Winnet, fortress, T suffix. Bikola, strong, very strongly. With strength, kola, to become very hard, because this root here means strong, and this T suffix makes it a fortress. And so here, and then wun, to open. Kanunu, kanuna, means to open. And this is based on harmony here. So this is actually an L sound, but the L turns into N because of the following N that that changes the L into an N. And so, but these are all just variations of the same consonant. But you see here that it is regular, that you can't say that I just looked at this and said that this is similar in sound. This is not Greenberg. This is actual, and I don't even know if y'all can hear me. I told you I live on an Air Force base. So it's planes and helicopters, going overhead all the time. So I don't know if y'all can hear that, but if you couldn't, because of the noise outside, they just left. So good. So what I was saying is that these are not, this isn't coincidence. This strengthens the case. So even in the Yoruba language, Iwin, character, reputation. In Yoruba is Iwa or Uwa, being, existence, life, manner, being, existence, character. This for word here, weri, to fall into, a condition, to come to. Wo, to fall, collapse. Win, color. Awo, color. Inim, skin of a man, hide of an animal, skin color. The syllables are switched here, and the M sound doesn't turn into W like it does when it's in this position. And so it's awo, skin, leather. Wo, they, them, there. Awon, they, them, there. In Yoruba, the second syllable often falls, especially if it's a liquid or a nasal. But in other times they keep it. So minui, a measure for a fabric. Won, a measure. Blah, blah, blah. Were, quickly. Wada, wada. We see it's the same thing here. It's just like what we saw in Chiluba, but they pronounce it, the Yoruba language pronounces these words closer to the Egyptian than does the Chiluba form. But we know by rules of linguistics that the Chiluba is older. They have the older pronunciation, and that the K's became W's and M's by way of rounding. There's a whole process which we won't get into now. So the Chiluba is older than the Egyptian forms of these same words here. But the Yoruba and the Egyptian, they're the same. They're more pronounced closer to each other than with the Bantu. And so what we learn in terms of the word nefer itself, based on Chiluba, is that, the cognate for it, like be beautiful, good, pretty, well, pleasant, etc., general, calm, damp, cool, peaceful, because the word nefer means basically all of this and more. So you're going to have to pause this and go through this. Again, this is for those of you who have my book, Maweja Yoruba Orisha, an ancient Egyptian Ak, it's in that text in the appendix. So this is the various ways in which you would say the word nefer, which means beautiful, kind, fair, well-being, luck, treasures, good, happy, well, fine, etc., etc. in different African languages. So in Kiswahili, we have pole for sympathy. In the Yoruba word, that same word is pele, sympathy to someone who has suffered hurt. Kiswahili, pole, pole, gently. Yoruba, pele, pele, gently, softly, carefully, or to take care. In Wolof, you would say nopi, to be quiet, peaceful. In Chilupa, we would say pupa, to calm, appease. And then of other variation in Chiluba, pudikija, impulse, silence, yada, yada, yada. In Sumerian, these are the different variations, and these correlate in terms of the same sound meaning correspondences for the same word. And of course, I give the sound meaning correspondences in the text here. And so, for example, when you're looking at Yoruba, note that, when you say pele or any kind of p sound in Yoruba, it's really kpe, kpe, kpe. It's a doubly articulated sound, kpe. But it's losing that feature in modern Yoruba today. So we say pe. So the word nefer, good, beautiful, perfect. In Yoruba, pari, finish, ipari, end, completion, conclusion, pe, to complete, pipe, perfect, neferiet, end, limit, pala, demarcate, be contiguous, neferu, base, ground, below, ipele, base, foundation, groundwork, initial, neferu, deficiency, aipe, deficient, shortage, a loss. Remember what I said, the liquids in nasals are often lost in Yoruba in the second consonant position. So some of them you will see them with them, and some you won't because of the issue of stress on the first syllable. So fit, to become erased, pare, erase, param, destroy, feri, start doing something, to bring into office, bile, begin, originate, bon, fere, to carry, to lift, bon, carry baby on the back, ferik, bald one, ba, bald, apari, bald, ferit, curse, epe, to curse, verb. And so notice that in this form of the verb, the word curse as a noun is because of this T suffix, which nominalizes verbs. And so you gotta, when you're doing the work with ancient Egyptian, you gotta know what these suffixes mean. This is a nominalizing suffix here. This is a verbal suffix here. And this is just a variation of the same verbal suffix. And so you can see the correspondences. And here's another variation, of the same consonant sequence. Now the F becomes Y, and the R is dropped in many of the forms here, with the exception of these two forms that you see here. So dialect, you got to have a strong understanding of dialects. But you notice that these words don't look alike. We're not doing Greenberg mass comparison. We're doing the historical comparative method. And when we do this, we see these correlations. So anybody talking about Egyptian ain't got no connection with Yoruba language, bullshit. When did they do the analysis? Let me see your work. See, there's a difference between people who make claims, and then there's people like me who shows you their work. I come from a mathematical background. We had to show our work. And so, demonstration beats conversation, as I say all the time. So this phrase here, un nefer, is equivalent to Yoruba phrase iwa pele. So when we talk about iwa pele as being a central characteristic of the Yoruba religious tradition, it's the same thing in Egyptian. They just use a different pronunciation of the phrase, un nefer. And so if you wanted to say this in Chiluba, it would be Nkadelu Muimpila, Mukalu Muimpela. Now, I don't know if they put this phrase together. This is just how you would say it in Chiluba. But I know as a working phrase, as a living phrase, when you say Iwa Pele, they'll say it's gentle character, the comparisons lets us know that this is actually also a word for good. So good character. That's why it's associated with Osiris. He's the judge, and what he does is he judges people's good character. And because of his good nature, because of his good character, this is why he was granted after his brother Set killed him, that when he was resurrected, he became the lord or king of the underworld, the Duat, and became the judge of people's character. Because only someone of Nefer, of Iwapele, can judge others. And so the Yoruba, is a different branch of the Ntu sphere. They belong to the Ntu universe. And so when I say, I usually now say Ntu Yoruba. Like I would say Ntu Chiluba, or Ntu Chikam, or Ntu Egyptian, because they all belong to the same universe. And this is one of the major ways that you can prove this. And so if the ancient Egyptians would have come out of the Middle East, they would be able to do, in terms of linguists or historians, they would be able to do easily what I just did for you on this screen, and they can't. And I should have, that's what I know I should have added. The conference and the book that's coming out showing that you can't show a relationship between Egyptian and Semitic. All white scholars, and they just recently had a conference on this. So who are these mystical, magical people out of Eurasia that came and dropped and gave ancient Egyptian its language, but you can't even show a relationship between those languages? But I can easily do it with Bantu and Yoruba and Wolof and Sango, et cetera, et cetera. And so this is why the film series itself is very important, so that we can and I'll just exit out of here now because that's the end of the presentation. But this is the exact reason why again, the film is important, because we get to bring out stuff like this. And when you stand on science, when you stand on correct methodology, you can challenge anyone. And so, I know y'all probably going off in the chat, so I have to review that at some later time. But so yeah, so like when the whole TikTok video is just, it was just out of pocket. It's not based on any sound methodology, and they can do that when you're just making a random video and you don't have a deep discussion about nuance, about history, about the complexities of these. For example, and I hope to have him on the program soon. This is an author, an Egyptologist by the name of Urosh Matik. And this is a text, Ethnic Identities in the Land of the Pharaohs. And one of the things that he stresses is that, when you're talking about Egyptian, especially after a certain point, it's almost meaningless, because you had different ethnic groups in Egypt. And, Egyptian, after, the unification, is really equivalent to like saying American. American doesn't mean nothing. It only means, if you're an American, this just means you was born and raised and or have citizenship in the United States of America. And so when people are saying stuff like so and so, they not Egyptians. Yes, they are Egyptians. like the Afar, like the Dinka, like the Luo. All Egyptians, like the Nubian groups that still live there now. Like with the last time that I went to Egypt, I was in Aswan in the so-called Nubian territories. And you've seen pockets of Assyrians, because at that time they were having a war, and there was a lot of people who were exiled out of Assyria or Syria. And you be riding in now, and then you just see a gang of black folks, and then it just be a pocket of some white folks in the middle of the Nubian village, and then you go a little bit more, you see some more black folks. And we were informed that these were people from Syria. And so you have stuff like that even in ancient times, where people were escaping famine in the Middle East, coming and settling in Egypt. They are Egyptians as well. But the language, the culture, all of that, which when they came and met there, that stuff didn't originate in the Middle East or in the Levant. That stuff came from the South. And even the most conservative of Egyptologists have been forced to acknowledge this. Matter of fact, even when you read in the Bible, they tell you that the Egyptians come from the southern part, the Remech. Even in the biblical times, they knew that the Egyptians, the real ones, come from the south. And it's even found its way in the Bible. But anyway, that was my presentation. Let me go into some of these comments, because I know y'all having your own conversation, and I would have to I want to thank first, peace and blessings, brother David Shaw. It says, Asar, tell them like Rakim, I take 7 scholars, put them in a line, and add 7 more teachers whose arguments oppose mine. Well, it ain't. Well, it'll take 7 more before I go for mine. Now that's 21 frauds, ate them up at the same time. Peace and blessings to brother David Shaw. Hopefully I will see you. Are you still in Austin though? If you're in Houston on the weekend of January 8th and 9th, I would love to see you there at the Shrine of the Black Madonna for the gathering, with Brother Professor Smalls and Dr. Wade Nobles, and showing the film Hoppy and the Light. So that's my man's there, Brother David Shaw. Thank you for the super chat. I really do appreciate it. And I know there was another super chat. It won't let me go up that far. Actually, it will. There we go. Thank you to Brother Supremacy. He says, a little token of appreciation for your scholarship. I appreciate you and for your contribution. And so, yeah, I'll have to go through these comments on my own later or something to this nature. He says, brother says, yep, I'm still in Austin, but he'll be there. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. And let me say, how do you feel about Chief X saying West Africans have nothing to do with Kemet? Look, peace and blessings to Chief X, but this is just not his area of study. And again, he's not a scholar, and he'll say this. He'll start off his conversations when you challenge him with anything that he's not a scholar, and he don't claim to be, but he makes scholastic claims. And in order for you to make scholastic claims, you have to be a scholar and to know where to look for and how to vet information. And he just doesn't know how to do that. And so, especially the fact that, a lot of work is written in French or German. And unless you have access and have a way to translate this stuff, if it hasn't been translated into English already, you're missing out on a lot of scholarship. and it's just a shame. Let me see. What is this? In the Arabian Peninsula, EEF farmers mixed with ancestral sub-Saharan Africans related to modern Nigerian, Gambian, Botswana populations. That's from Mr. K. Yeah, y'all having a different discussion. He says how they arrive at Nefer for that upside down glyph F35. Which glyph? Are you talking about the lung and heart? Because sometimes you'll see the words written out with the full consonants. And so this is how we know that the triliteral, a lot of the triliteral glyphs, have a particular pronunciation, because some of the glyphs are not written solely with the triliteral glyphs itself. They're actually spelled out with monoliteral glyphs, and so that's how you know. And then of course we can confirm it by doing a comparison in related African languages. So the word for heart and trachea, all that is Nefer in Chiluba, and this is exactly what I mean. Let me see. Tamika says 3 donations today. Well, whoever the third person was, I do apologize. I didn't get to see it, and it wouldn't let me scroll up past a certain number. But whoever you are, just make yourself known again, and I will acknowledge you. I do appreciate your donation. Thank you very much. Let me see. Says people really use Chief X as a source because he's black. And it's Chief X is he's interesting. I'll just leave it at that. You could ask that question about any triliteral. He said it's a tri. Donnie Williams says it's triliteral. Let me see. E1, B1A is an African lineage that probably expanded from Northern Africa to Sub-Saharan Africa and Equatorial Africa with the Bantu agricultural expansion. We're going to have another discussion. I know we've had one in the past, just kind of an open discussion with some of the brothers from the EgyptSearch.com website, and we need to have another one kind of going over these things. And I've had Dr. Shamarka Keita here several times, and I'm going to bring some other geneticists and things to explain some things in the near future, coming in 2022. So big ting the guan. But make sure that each and every one of you that is right, hit the like button. I want y'all to break your screens hitting the like button. And if you are new to the channel, please subscribe. And so we can continue these dialogues in the near future. So if y'all have any questions or whatnot, please make sure that you ask them in the comment section. I will try to answer them there. If something warrants its own show and presentation, we can do that. And you see, it says peace, Osar from the UK. Do Nigerians confirm what you say in regards to what? Can you be a little bit more specific in terms of what I say, in terms of what? Brother Kwame, if you are listening. Let me see. He says, what does Asar think the most important discipline is? Linguistics, No, I don't think any discipline is more important than the other. It just depends on what research question you are trying to answer. So, depending upon what research question you are asking, that determines what tools you're going to use. So when I use linguistics because it is one tool that I can use to study human migrations and interactions when I'm trying to get into the psychology of a people, and or if I'm trying to get a better understanding of vocabulary or grammatical features between certain languages. So what happens is like like a concept like ma'at in ancient Egypt. It's not really defined in the ancient Egyptian language. The definitions that we have for ma'at are based on context and how it's used in the script, but there's no indigenous definition for the word ma'at in Egyptian. So what I would do is do a cross comparison between related languages with a series of sound meaning correspondences, and then I will find the cognate or equivalent of the word ma'at in these related languages. And then because we're on more sure footing of the meanings of the modern words, because we have living people who are still using the words today, we get a better understanding of the terms in ancient Egyptian. And not only that, it helps us to break down words in ancient Egyptian. This is how I was able to discover better that the Egyptian language is a monosyllabic language consisting of consonant vowel and or consonant vowel consonant words. And so the triliterals, the um, the triliteral words and things is really monosyllabic, or trisyllabic words are really monosyllabic words with prefixes and suffixes added to the roots. And we can demonstrate this internally within the language in ancient Egyptian, as well as the corresponding languages for which it is related to. He said, Brother Chavez says, how is Shamarka's publication coming along? It's coming along. I'm still waiting on him because he has just a lot on his plate. And, so he has his regular job and some other stuff that he's doing. And then his family, he's married to a collagen woman from Kenya. And currently his kids, their children together, they're married, but they're living in Kenya. So he goes back and forth and dealing with that. So it's and then he's also and I hope he doesn't get upset at me saying this, but his mother is still living, and he's also taking care of his mother as well. So it's been a lot. So and I'm pushing him to have him carve some time to we can finish this book. But the first rounds of edits have already been done. However, he wants to add some stuff to it, and so that's basically what all I'm waiting on is for the added material, and then we go through that editing process, and then we'll publish Dr. Keita's books. And I've been trying to call my mom all day. Now she's calling back. I'll hit her back later. Let me see. It goes, hey, Asar, I've heard some people claim they can show some connections between the Akan of West Africa and ancient Kemet. Is this pseudo or does it have validity? You can only judge it based upon their presentation. What is their proof? And what are they basing this on? This is based on archaeology. Is it based on language? Is it based on just common cultures? So when we say connections, we have to be clear on what we mean here in terms of connections. So you can have connections conceptually wise, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a historical relationship between two groups. So this is why the methods are very important in these discussions. So, for example, let's let's just say we're just going to randomly ancient Egyptians, Yoruba people, right? So I'm just picking people in 3 distinct areas of Africa. So what could happen is, for example, that there's a historic relationship, a genetic relationship. So remember the argument that I made earlier that the Chiena-Ntu speakers originate near the Great Lakes region. And then over time, they spread up and then they spread out. And so some of them could have went into the Sahara, some could have stayed in the Sahel and traveled west, and then others went up the Nile or down the Nile, technically, into what the Sudan is modern day, the Sudan's upper and lower Sudan, and in ancient Egypt, right? So there could be semblances or correspondences between those groups as a result of them coming from a common ancestor. And then over time, their descendants traveled and spread. And so those connections are still detectable. So there might be some kind of DNA correspondence. There might be a linguistic correspondence between those groups. So that's one kind of connection. Then there's argument migrations, right? So it could be that some people from the Sudan and or ancient Egypt migrated west and settled and or interacted with people who became the Yoruba, and went further west and became people who interacted and became the Wolof and Fulani and Seer, folks in further West Africa. So that would be a case of contact, group and cultural contact. Or it could be the other way around, that the ancestors of the Wolof and the Yoruba people actually moved up and west and found their way into ancient Kemet and shared their culture, and it became integrated in part of the pantheon of characteristics of ancient Kemet. And so a lot of times what people will do is, if there's any kind of resemblance, they automatically assume that the direction is coming from Egypt west, when in fact it could be west coming east. Now, it could be the result of halfway interactions. So if we're talking about like material culture, any kind of trade goods like beads or metals and things of that nature. So this could also happen. You have people from ancient Egypt and Sudan interacting with people up to Lake Chad, right? And then they share and interact and interchange with culture, and they do trade and things of that nature with those folks. Then those Chadic folks, the people who live around Lake Chad, could just cross the water, take some of the trade goods and ideas and stuff that they had, and go over, and now they're interacting with people in Nigeria, in Cameroon, and share. So some items and some concepts and things may come from ancient Egypt, but not directly to the Yoruba. It could be by way of Chadic speakers who interacted earlier with some Egyptian families and things who may have settled along the way or was doing trade, because we know that ancient Egypt was doing trade all the way up to Chad in terms of inner Africa, and then of course all up along the quote unquote Red Sea into Ethiopia, Somalia. And even still, there was trade items going all the way to Mozambique and Madagascar. And so those people were trading with the people in Punt, and then the people in Punt were taking that stuff and trading it with people in ancient Egypt and in the Middle East. And so I discussed that a little bit in Alluja Volume 2 that came out in 2020. And so you gotta understand these levels of interactions. And so the question then becomes, well, how do we demonstrate that this is in fact the case, depending on these different hypotheses? So remember, in science, we have a list of hypotheses and explanations for some kind of reality in which we've observed, and we do experiments to falsify the hypotheses and only leave up what the experiments could not falsify. And this is how you go. So it really just depends on the methods. It depends on what you're looking for and asking, and then what would take the let me back up. What instruments and what methods would be necessary to validate a particular type of hypothesis? Some things may require archaeological data. Some things may require genetic data. Some things may require linguistic data. Some things may require all of them to get a more complete picture. And so, you as a scholar, you just don't go off of one thing. It's always a series of things that help us to paint a picture. And what you try to do as well is to not go with a hypothesis that has not been demonstrated to be fact based upon the standard methods of analysis. And so I hope I've answered that question. I know that was kind of long. So it says, great show. Do you have a show specifically speaking on cultural similarities of West Africans in contrast with other Near Eastern cultures? Not necessarily Near Eastern cultures, but with ancient Egyptian more specifically, yes, I do. And it's titled something like Ancient Egypt and West African Connections. Yeah, and as a matter of fact, it was a 2-part series, 1 and 2. So it's on the channel. You just have to look for it. Let me see. I want to purchase your books, but what have you found out that's most interesting to you? I don't know in terms of interesting, because I've been at this for a while. So if you would have asked me this, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, uh, I would have found certain things interesting. But I'm at the point now where this is what I expect in terms of these particular correspondences in history. And so if anything is the strong relationship between ancient Egypt in terms of its ideas and philosophies with Bantu speaking people. And so we also got to understand again that these are ideas, languages, and things. They can be adopted by anyone regardless of race, of so-called race. And so it could be, like, let's just say for the sake of argument, that ancient Egypt was that a gang of migrants came out of the Middle East and settled into Egypt and created ancient Egyptian civilization. What we do know is that, one, is highly unlikely, but two, if they did, they adopted an African language and African cultures. And so the milieu, you won't find it, above Egypt in this type of high concentration. But once you get into Africa proper, everything that you see in ancient Egypt, from the mass, from the name of the deities, to the concept of a pyramid, how the way in which they bury their kings in mountains, all of these traditions are alive and well in Africa to this very date. So you could explain it that when they came into Egypt, they just adopted an indigenous African culture and built on it. That's a possibility. And we know this to be not far-fetched, Because every single time, with the exception of the Arabs under Islam, every other culture that came into Egypt adopted ancient Egyptian culture and language. Every last one of them. The Greeks, the Romans, the Persians, the Libyans, the Berbers, everyone adopted the ancient Egyptian culture. They didn't come in trying to impose their culture, because it was the African indigenous culture that came from the South that was the most prominent and prestigious. So this is why when we're having this fight, you have to do this on the cultural and linguistic levels, because they can't explain you can't explain ancient Egypt with the Middle East or Europe. It's impossible. That's why and I only cited one European author who says, the Dogon and Bantu philosophy, but there are others who come to the same conclusions, that if you're trying to answer questions of culture of ancient Egypt, you're never going to understand it looking at the people in the Middle East, in Arabia, or in Europe. The only understanding you're going to get is if you study those people in Africa, and that in Africa, so-called sub-Saharan Africa. And when you do that, you can only come to the conclusion that the reason that is because these sub-Saharan Africans migrated up north and settled into this area. And when others came in, just like during the Pharaonic period, all they did was adopt the African culture and the African language. Everything, we can explain everything. Damn near, I should say damn near. Everything when it comes to ancient Egypt with Bantu culture and philosophy. Let me see. Mr. K, thanks for the mention. DNA tribes is fascinating. DNA breakdown of Ramses III and possibly Pinta were mainly African, Great Lakes, Southern African, and tropical West African. Yes, and it was a great study, but even then, we still have to be limited, because, as I mentioned beforehand, for example, let me share my screen real quick, and this is a limited. Let me do this. So hopefully, y'all can see this on the screen. Excuse me. This is just a Wikipedia article. It says list of DNA tested mummies, right? I don't know if this is like all the DNA of ancient, hominids, but in terms of general, these are the list of the DNA mummies, and so I'm pretty sure there's some more. But let's just assume, for the sake of argument, that this is all of them, right? So when you go to the Wikipedia page, you'll see first, mitochondrial DNA test, right? There's some Y haplogroups, done here, but look at the amount. I counted here, and it's 31, right? But look at the original location of the remains of the mummies that DNA tests were actually done on. So you have here Paglici 23, Paglici 25 from Italy, right? So these two are from Italy. These numbers here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So these are 7 mummies, but they're from Morocco. And so here's their group, U6A7, M1B, yada, E1, B1, 1A1, yada, yada, yada. Then there's Cheddar Man in England. Then there's Otzi, the Iceman in Austria, Italy. Now we get into Egypt. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in Egypt here, right? And so, Naket Ankh, allegedly M1A1, Khnum Naket, M1A1, Queen Tai U5B, da 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 da. And then this unknown, and so if you look up here, there's some issues with this page that they have here, because some of this stuff ain't been released. as far as especially Egypt is concerned. But that's another, that's neither here nor there. So then we go here. There's a Canaanite woman, or a nobleman, another one from Israel. These two are from Israel. And then here's 5 more from Egypt. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so, when we're talking about that E1, B1A, someone mentioned earlier, in terms of the Great Lakes and who they correspond with, and da 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 da. So they're saying Tutankhamun is R1, B1. I don't know where they got that from. But and then we have England, Peru, Tunisia, Argentina. So Egypt has provided the most because of its dry continent. Its dry environment. But notice out of the 31 here, 10 of them are from Egypt. So when people are making these claims about population history for over 3,000 years, none of these are old kingdom Egyptians. These are all new kingdom and later Egyptians at a time with a large influx of people from the Middle East. And remember that the ancient Egyptians were taking wives from the Middle East. So you'll find a lot of Middle Eastern mitochondrial DNA. Matter of fact, the ancient Egyptians were importing a lot of women from the Levant because they had a specialization in the weaving, in making cloth and clothing. So it's just like how we, get a lot of immigrants from India who do software development, or we get a lot of immigrants from Mexico who do a lot of landscaping work and in construction and stuff like that. In the United States, the Egyptians were doing that with people from the Levant. So when you see a lot of Levant DNA in some of the mummies, especially in the New Kingdom, you have to know the history that helps to explain that. Well, it makes sense. They were bringing in a whole bunch of women from there. So when you understand that the people in the Levant have been controlling the garment trade since the time of the pharaohs, then you understand why when you go to New York in a garment district and things, and when you go to certain places in Europe, why Jews run the garment industry, because they have a long history of this going all the way to the time of the pharaohs. So history matters, but these 10 mummies are not going to tell you about population history about ancient Kemet. This is statistically insignificant in comparison to the population of ancient Egypt over a 3,000 plus year time span. And so people over exaggerate stuff, and they act like we got an abundance, like we got hundreds of thousands of DNA results that we can come to a conclusion based upon DNA studies. So even if you find like a Ramesses III and related folks that have DNA that corresponds with people in the Great Lakes, you can't take that as a victory. That's still an insignificant number in terms of how many actual DNA studies have been done. And so this is why you have to have conversations with actual scholars who would understand this from the jump, and not these internet crazy folks who just jump to conclusions and have no sound methodology and understand how scholarship is done in the first place. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen on there. So I hope said, he said, they're trying to do some comparative work that exposes silliness of back migration. Exactly. Excuse me. Someone said, what books, authors outside of yourself would you recommend for an introduction into linguistics? Someone recently asked me that question on Instagram, and the answer that I gave them is the answer I'm going to give you. So just linguistics in general, I highly recommend this book here, Linguistic Anthropology, by Nancy Perot Hickerson. Linguistic Anthropology, 2nd edition, right? And so it'll give you a good history in terms of give you evolutionary. It has evolutionary discourse, phonetics discourse, historical comparative linguistics discourse. It has a chapter on writing, and I'm mad that they don't have ancient Egyptian in here, but that's another story. On grammar, syntax, everything that you would need as an introductory into linguistics as a whole. This is a good little text here, and it's not too big, and it's only about, from beginning to end, about 265 pages. Right. So that is Linguistic Anthropology, second edition, Nancy Perot Hickerson. And then from there, you can elevate into some, depending on what else you're trying to learn. So linguistics is a very vast field. Let me see here. Those pockets of white people you talked about earlier are being there for a long time, and they're called halab, with strong emphasis on the H. Were you referring to ancient Assyrians or modern refugees? No, I said Assyrians, but I meant Syrians, modern refugees. So this was the last time I was in Egypt was 2015. So in 2015, and you can just check the timeline. There was I think it was a civil war, it was an internal war, so it caused a lot of refugees to scatter, and so a lot of those refugees came into Egypt, and a lot of them settled in Aswan. And so when I was in the blackest of Egypt, where you still is still black Egyptians that live there, you see you be on the river and you'll be kind of gliding by, and you just saw just these pockets of Syrians. And so if I said Assyrians, that was a slip. I'm talking about Syria today. And so everyone should know about the conflict that was going on at the time in Syria and caused a lot of refugees. But just to reemphasize that, ancient Egypt was a refuge, even if we take the biblical myth seriously. Remember that they were starving, and so because they were starving, Abraham's family came into Egypt, got healthy and whole, and then went back. When Jesus needed to escape death, he went into Egypt. Egypt has always been the refuge for those groups who are trying to escape hunger and war, because things were more peaceful on average. But this was causing a lot of conflicts because people that they were conflicting with was coming in, starting conflicts with Egypt. And so this is where you see these battles, scenes, and wars with people, the quote unquote Asiatics, because they were coming in such large numbers that it was causing conflicts. So all this is in the Egyptian record. So finding folks in the Middle East, especially in the Delta area, is not a surprise. Let me see. Conversation with Simon because he tend to go left when he goes to question sex with him because he has never seen anything. None of y'all see me have sex with a woman. That's something I have in private. Like, who does that? Now I can do some porn. I have a porn name that I gave myself. I'm not going to tell y'all what that is, but I still have some ratchet in me from my East Terrace Project days. But no, yeah, he be on some clown-ish. Do the Nigerians confirm your linguistic comparisons with that of ancient Egypt? Yes, they do. Matter of fact, on my channel, I have a linguist, an elder linguist by the name of Dr. Modupe Oduyoye, right? And he is a linguist. He studied at Yale University, and he's also a theologian. And he has written a book, and this has been his whole life's work, showing these correspondences. And for some reason, I can't find the book that I am looking for, and I know you are up here somewhere. So here, It's an old book, and so it's falling apart like literally. Um, so this book here by Dr. He's just one example. Dr. Modupe Oduyoye, Words and Meaning in Yoruba Religion. Linguistic Connections in Yoruba, Ancient Egyptian, and Semitic. And there are other linguists who, even Teofilo Bing has done some comparative work with Yoruba and Egyptian. And of course, like when you're dealing with Hausa is a language that they always compare with ancient Egyptian as well. But they group Hausa with the so-called Afro-Asiatic. So that's not surprising at all, but they're Nigerians. And then there's Dr. Sau as well, who has done some work. And let me see. Let me see. Let me see. He said, yep, Mangoli silly. Let me see. For sure. They also had the DNA, MLI, highest number was most likely of the Rana dynasty. I'm not the third to the almost Southern African, African Green Lakes. Let me see. Sorry. What is your take on Africans using psychedelics? I mean, I don't have a personal opinion for or against. I know that certain African groups have done it, and to evoke trance in certain rituals, and some are against it. I have no opinion either way. And so if you're looking for a different type of answer, uh, you know, please follow up this question. Let's see. How do I just search the keyword? I don't know. Going to the Dravidian connection as the Seth worshippers. I don't know specifically about Dravidian connection, and I know there's a journal. It's either a journal article or there is a PhD dissertation on the connection between Seth. Like Seth is supposed to be a Baal of the Levant, and I haven't read it, so I can't really give you any insights. But as far as Dravidian, I'm not sure. But I know there's been 3 scholars out of Senegal who have gotten their PhD dissertations, who have gotten their PhD uh, demonstrating the relationship between Wolof and Dravidian. And they got their degrees at universities in India. And so that's interesting. Let me see. I'm familiar. I broke tribes on my analysis down. The primary research with new raw data. Yesterday, we had conversation. It says, Brother Sar, would you also clarify how European scholars are able to draw ancestral connections between Sumerians and Akkadian, Phoenicians, Canaanites, and Semites in particular? That's a large conversation, but again, this idea of connections, like when people say connections and affinity, you have to be specific. In connections in what way? If there's any connections between the Akkadians and Phoenicians and Canaanites and Semites and Sumerians, is only as a result of proxy, because the Akkadians took over Sumeria, the Sumerian city states, and imposed and interacted with them and adopted the Sumerian cuneiform script, et cetera, et cetera. And so, but in terms of linguistically, they're not related. And so they're not the same people. They're not related at all in that fashion. So, the connections, you're going to have to be a little bit more specific in terms of what do you mean by connections. I promote psychedelics, but too much of anything is detrimental. Indeed. Let me see. We'll say, look up the book. Let me see. No. Speaking. Can we You can use help someone to learn a different language. I don't think being a linguist necessarily will help you to learn a different language faster. It will help you to better understand and describe the language. But to learn a language, there's really no way around it. You just have to immerse yourself in the language. That's the quickest way to learn a language, to immerse it. So let's say you want to learn Portuguese. Take a trip to Brazil and stay there for like 6 months or so. If you just got that kind of time, and don't come in learning the language. Don't just come and just get lost. Force yourself to learn the language to be able to get around. And that can be dangerous at sometimes, but that's what you have to do. You have to immerse yourself, that you're speaking with people who speak it every day. And it's just like when you were a baby. You learn your native language because you're immersed in it. You're hearing it being spoken, and then as you grow and understand, you're able to connect certain phenomena and ideas in the world with the language that you're hearing. And so that's how you learn. So it's no different. You got to immerse yourself. Let me see. There's several Necharu that have names that originate outside of Kemet, Jehuti, and Apu, for example. I wouldn't say Jehuti originates outside of Kemet per se. These are all words that we can find cognate in other African languages, but to say the deities themselves, well, I don't know if you're saying the deities themselves. He says there are several Necharu that have names that originate outside of Kemet. And we got to be careful about that wording, because if Jehuti, for example, and Ampu, which in Bantu is Mbwa, if they inherited these words, then they didn't originate outside of Egypt. In a technical, in a far distant historical context, you can make that argument. But in terms of Pharaonic Egypt, these are words that were inherited in the language and it's just been passed on from generation to generation, coming from the pre-dialectical ancestor. Let me see. Y'all talking about Hebrew Israelites now. All people have different names, several names. Let me see. Since or if they use the historical comparative method. That seems like part of a question. I don't know. Do they not include them? Y'all talking about DNA stuff. Zahir was. You are the first name heard. As I was to say, there were a lot of marriages between women of the Levant and the pharaohs. No, that's a fact. When you think about Ramesses II and how many women that he's got from the Levant in his harem, and so we got to understand that the idea of racial purity, and that didn't exist at that time. They were banging and slanging any beautiful woman that they could, whether it was to the south of them or to the north of them. They did not care. You say, let me see. Thanks to Sar. He says there are Black Egyptians in C1 Western. Yep, sure is. Let me see. Sorry, I missed it. Well, I appreciate you joining and catching what you can. And of course, this will be archived, and I'm going to end the stream soon because it's already going on 3 hours. And let me see. He says Hausa is from the Chadic branch, and Chadic may not even be a legit grouping. It's so much that that just isn't that hasn't been proven amongst Afrikaners that they just throw out there and then swear um, is real. And let me see where it's yep, yep, Mbwa. Yep. Okay, is the largest direct ancestor. He says best languages to learn. I'm not sure. I'm assuming that you're speaking of African languages. I don't know. I wouldn't categorize them as best languages. It just depends on what are you most attracted to first and foremost, and then do you plan on interacting with that language group on a regular basis? So if you feel that maybe making some trips to Nigeria, you want to learn Yoruba or Hausa, those are two good languages to learn. But of course, if go to Ghana, you may want to learn Twi. But if you have an affinity for like Senegal and that you may want to learn Wolof or a related language. It just depends. But the Pan African language to learn at the moment is Kiswahili. So and so yeah. It says Asar explained Fallujah 1 and 2. I'm assuming you're meaning Aluja, volumes 1 and 2. You're talking about this book here. Well, this is volume 2. And both volumes essentially are just re-examining major ancient Egyptian concepts and themes and having them in conversation with modern Black African languages, cultures, and societies, and seeing what can we learn more about these ancient Egyptian concepts by having these conversations with these other African groups. So that's in a nutshell what Aluja's volume 1 and 2. So all the chapters are different; they're different subjects. So it's not like a continuous single text in the context of a single subject for the text. There's just different subject matter that is handled in the text. Yes, indeed. Yep. And boy's the dog. Says, I agree. I was referring to the distant relationship as you stated. Alrighty. And lastly, sorry, I will rephrase it. What do you feel is the best African non-critical languages for Africans at the moment? I think Mandarin is needed due to colonization. Again, it's really is what is your purpose for learning? If you feel that China is, an important group to learn, excuse me, if Chinese is an important language for you to learn because of trade and you're trying to do some things in Africa and or whatnot, then, you learn Mandarin. But, just to learn Mandarin, if you just don't have an affinity for it, I wouldn't recommend it. Says, bro, do you believe we could prosper with Kiswahili alone, with mixing with example Hausa? Which writing systems are you for? You're just Kiswahili. The idea is simply that it would be used as a lingua franca. It would just be a language that we could communicate with other Africans whose language we don't understand. So it's you can prosper using it, but it's more so who are you trying to communicate and why are you trying to communicate? And so if we just pick Kiswahili and then the educational systems promote it and they teach their children, and then when we're traveling and say I'm in South Africa and I don't know isiZulu or isiXhosa or whatnot, but everyone understands Kiswahili because they're taught it, then we could communicate with Kiswahili, we could do business and whatnot without me having to necessarily learn Kosa, isiZulu, Afrikaans, and all this other kind of stuff. So that's the whole purpose of just picking. I have no political reason for Kiswahili, no deep philosophical thought. Just pick Kiswahili. Let's use it, and then let's create this United States of Africa. And that's essentially what we have to do. Let me see. Malcolm said that he wanted to learn Chinese and that it would be the most important political language of the future. He was prophetic because, the Chinese have become a world power. And, you're going to have to deal with them. They're already in Africa. And so, if you have business ambitions, it's a language to learn. It's a difficult language to learn, especially as an adult, but not impossible. So, we have resources there. But I think I will end it there. And I do appreciate each and every one of you for joining me today. Make sure that you hit the like button and that you subscribe and that you share this video with others. So with that said, until next time, love and light, peace, and y'all be safe this holiday. And whether you celebrate it or not, hug your family members, and I will see you on next week. All right, peace. I see reality breaking down all my fantasies. It would be nice if I at least had one fantasy. That neutrality about to take a terabyte from the American apple pie, better get a slice. It's kinda scary the way that this life is moving on. Marvin's doing backflips inside his grave, what's going on? We have head-on collisions, not seeing another's vision. Maybe that's the reason why some colors fit the description. A lot of relationships need life rafts, sinking ships. I guess you just can't have only one like potato chips. I would love for you to listen with an open heart, but would you really even hear me if it's torn apart?